Hey guys, we are on day 29 here, starting a new chapter. First of all, make sure you open up your notes. Once you click on this link, it should take you to something that looks like this. It's a PDF file. So you should be able to edit with Cami if you need to, or if you can print it, that would be even better, just because it's probably easier to use. But anyway, we're going to get started. We've got kind of a lot to fill out today, so I'm going to try to go fast. So if you have to pause the video here and there, by all means, do it. Starting you off here first with our daily log for the day. Okay, so answering these questions, take a minute, pause the video, plug them in, and we'll get moving here. All right, so hopefully you've got maybe some stats, maybe unemployment, maybe GDP, inflation are all listed on those notes that you might have just looked at. What it means for an individual in an economy that is doing well is usually their income is increasing. And if their income's increasing, they're spending more money, which creates incomes for other people, which the opposite happens if the economy is doing poorly. If I'm not making money or I'm in fear of not making money, I'm not going to spend it. And if I'm not spending it, that's not creating income for other people either. So we're going to kind of talk about that today. Notice how your notes are set up. Okay, so each slide has green and red. Okay, so the green is telling you where to write stuff. Okay, so for example, the first section here is what are business cycles. So that's what's in green, and then you're going to write what's in red. Okay, so the economy it goes through in these times of real healthy, real good, and real bad. Okay, it's kind of just like you and I. Like sometimes we get sick, we don't feel great. Other times we feel real good, and on top of that too, we don't really know when we're going to feel bad. Like we can't really predict it. We can make some pretty smart predictions and say, well, in the wintertime, I tend to get a little bit more sick. I catch a cold, whatever, or allergies and those types of things. But they are kind of unpredictable. But it's a cycle of good to bad. Okay, the two words that you want to know are expansion. That's a period of growth, sometimes called recovery if we're coming out of what's referred to as a recession. Unemployment's getting better, right? Or a contraction. Those are the two that you want to know. And again, that's a period of unemployment increasing, okay? And GDP falling, we'll talk about that as we move forward. Now, as I said, they're pretty unpredictable. This is unemployment over a course of, 60 years or so. It's not quite up to date. That's not the point of the graph, where you can see, like, when I say unpredictable, we can't say, oh, unemployment's at 10%. We're finally going to go back down, right? That's not necessarily what happens. It gets the worst at different heights, right? And it gets the best down at different heights as time goes on. These gray bars represent recessions, and you can see that those gray bars are also spaced out with different spaces. So we can't say, oh, it's been 5 years, we're going to have another recession. It doesn't quite work that way. Okay, so like we said, business cycles are irregular, but we do try to predict them. Okay, like I said, it's kind of comparable to you and I getting sick. Sometimes we can make smart predictions. Sometimes our predictions aren't necessarily perfect. There are some stats that we can use to predict the next business cycle. Okay, things that happen in different times that we could use as saying, hey, the economy is going to do better or the economy is going to do worse. The housing market is the one that usually happens first. If people are making money, they're going to be able to qualify to buy bigger houses, making prices of homes go up. We can use that as a leading indicator. We're going to look at real GDP as what is referred to as a coincident indicator. And then we have things that happen afterwards. Probably the most important is the unemployment rate. And so the lagging indicator represents that and unemployment becomes inaccurate when we have situations where, I might work 40 hours. Well, the boss might not want to lay me off before, just from if they start slowing down. They might cut my hours first, cut my wages first, something like that before laying us off completely. So those things happen after. All right, add this to your notes somewhere. There's no space for it. A recession is officially defined as an economic period of decline for at least 6 months, where unemployment goes up, usually prices go down, and people's incomes go down. Okay, so anyway, those are some things that are words that you might hear here and there in the news and those types of things. And those of you that might remember your parents talking about 2009, that's been the most recent recession. It'll be interesting to see if this COVID stuff causes a recession here in the next 3 to 6 months and how we bounce back from that. But anyway, okay. So go ahead and answer these questions real quick. Okay. Answering which country you think is the best in the world, and why you think that before we get to our GDP topic. Pause if you need to. All right. So we're talking about GDP now. Notice here on your notes, okay, you have the column. We're on the GDP column. Here is the special terms column. They go in order from left to right, so it shouldn't confuse you, but the special terms is what you're writing here in red, okay? So there's a few different ways we can look at GDP. First of all, different countries have different currencies, so somebody has to do some math to, make it so everything's even, okay? So we call that nominal GDP. Real GDP is year to year. That'll make a little bit more sense after we talk about inflation in a couple days. But we try to compare things on a consistent dollar amount. So meaning that a dollar had way different value in 1982 than it does today. So somebody does the math and we are able to compare things a little bit more fairly, so to speak. GDP growth is listed as a percent. That's probably the most important thing we want to look at. And we'll look at some stats here in a little bit. That's listed as a percent. And you can see if you look at your notes, 2 to 4% growth is considered pretty good, okay, for the United States. And then last, we also have per capita GDP. And that per capita GDP is basically all the GDP added up and then divided by the population. This is probably, if we're comparing countries, the best statistic. So there's some things that are kind of going on in the in the world today that are pretty competitive. So the first one I want to mention is the GDP. And if we go to these rankings here, these numbers are in trillions of dollars. And you can see that the United States does not have the biggest economy in the world. China actually does. And some people think that that's a really bad thing. And I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but there's some ways that we can explain it. So if we take the per capita GDP, we can see that the United States is actually 10th. All right, very closely related to average income. Okay, not exactly the same. And then we can see that even though China does a whole lot of good things and produce a whole lot of stuff, their per capita GDP is very low. They're much less efficient with their resources than we are. Okay, so even though their economy is real big, they have tons and tons and tons more people than us, and it makes their per capita GDP a little bit worse. Another thing I'll point out is that this is GDP growth here, okay? And this up here on top is the United States, and this is China. And China's economy is growing really fast, significantly faster than ours. But they were also really bad for a long time. So that makes things a little bit easier for them to grow. The other thing you can see is that when the United States does poorly, negative growth, meaning our economy shrunk, generally the rest of the world struggles too, because we have a lot of people that now can't buy stuff from other countries. This is the most recent data from obviously this COVID-19 stuff, and we'll kind of see how things play out over the course of the next few months and years or so, and see if this is something that is sustained. All right. So the way it's figured is basically it takes everything that's produced, okay, and it adds up the dollar amount of all those final goods and services, and we get, in our case, $20 trillion or so. So it's obviously a huge number, and the reason it's important is because we're trying to see if we're producing more. Like I said, if we produce stuff, we're going to assume that people are earning money, right? We're producing an income, and we can see if people are doing better or our country's doing better or worse than the year before. Notice we don't count things twice, okay? We're not going to count things twice. And we also count services. So I don't have to produce something. So my teaching salary goes towards GDP, even though I don't produce a physical product. So what causes it here is, first of all, the stuff you and I buy. Also realize that businesses buy stuff too. So when a business buys a bulldozer, that's considered what is called business investment. Okay, but it's the same thing. They're still purchasing something, and we also have the government purchasing things as well. So the government hires private companies to build stuff, whether it's roads or bridges or whatever, and that adds to our GDP as well. So the government can actually make GDP better. And in terms of this COVID stuff, the government had decided to put out those stimulus checks. That was so we would spend those, and if we spent those, hopefully it would increase production, increase people earning money, and be able to kind of get us out of that initial lull in the economy with COVID. It's not perfect. Okay, again, it's just a number of how much we produce. Um, it doesn't count household and volunteer work. So some people say it's extremely valuable to be able to have a stay-at-home parent helping with whatever. Obviously, those people don't earn money, so it doesn't count that what we would consider makes our lives better or our kids' lives better. We can't count that. Volunteer firefighters don't count. It can't keep track of illegal exchanges. Probably most commonly thought of first is like drug trafficking or drug sales. And if you don't pay taxes, the government doesn't necessarily know that you're doing something either. So if you informally mow a lawn and you don't pay taxes on that, that doesn't add to our GDP either, even though money is circulating through the economy. If we have a natural disaster, for example, a hurricane destroys a city. Well, when we rebuild that city, it's going to add to our GDP. And so, what is probably considered kind of a bad thing, it's still going to make our GDP look a little bit better. It's going to ignore externalities. We talked about those back yesterday, and it talks about like pollution, and we can work and work and work and produce and produce and produce, but if we pollute, China's going through this right now. If we pollute, then our lifestyle is not nearly as good. Again, if we're also only focused on producing stuff and we don't have any leisure time, we work ourselves to death. Our GDP goes up, but we don't enjoy ourselves. And it also doesn't say anything about who has it. Okay, so again, if one person makes $100,000 a year and another person makes $2,000 a year, our per capita GDP is really good. It's like 51,000. But somebody's really well off, somebody's really really poor off. Okay, so it's not a perfect measurement. Nothing is. Those are some of those limitations. All right. In general, countries that experience good growth, they're educated, they live longer, and they have more stuff that improve their life and standard of living. Okay. And here's just a quick list of some standard of living stuff. Whether it's a low crime rate, it could be as simple as indoor plumbing. Whatever the case might be, those are the things that make our life easier, probably more entertaining as well. Like I said, I know that was really quick. I'm trying to respect your time. I went too long the other day. So I appreciate those of you guys that watched that and got good to go. No assignment for today. Make sure you're staying in touch about your business presentation, and we will talk again soon.